The passage of the amendments to the Prevention of Terrorism Act the other day are being hailed as the first step in a series of progressive steps to arrive at a counter-terrorism piece of legislation in accordance with international human rights standards. The point, though, is that the amendments made yesterday hardly scratch at the surface of the key concerns, the key human rights concerns that are there with regard to the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Key amongst them, chief one amongst them, is the whole question of the acceptance of confessions. Nothing has been done with regard to this. There is confusion with regard to the provision of bail. There is also the unsatisfactory provision that allows for a magistrate to go find out as to whether PTA detainees have been tortured or not. And as we know, detecting, identifying as to whether torture has taken place is not just a question of going and visiting. There are any number of ways in which that could be hidden from the public view. The argument that these limited, to the extent that we can be generous about these amendments, are only possible with regard to the PTA after 43 years of its introduction is, I think, again unacceptable, because we have a government that has introduced constitutional amendments. Remember, it has a two-thirds majority. Constitutional amendments without much of a say-so. The 20th Amendment happened practically overnight. So the argument that the PTA cannot be changed, cannot be repealed, cannot be replaced by a counter-terrorism legislation in conformity with international human rights standards is not something that I can buy, quite frankly. There is a Law Commission report. I think it dates from 2016. There have been favorable references to it as a piece of draft legislation that conforms to the international human rights standards that is necessary for a counter-terrorism act. I think we should look at it and proceed to do this without much delay. Furthermore, the issue of counter-terrorism legislation in the country, and we all agree that there ought to be that, should not be something that's brought to the forefront of public policy debate at a time when sessions in Geneva with regard to resolutions on Sri Lanka are pending, or when there is a possibility that the GSP Plus concession will be withdrawn by the European Union. If this is important to the country, it is as important at all times, irrespective of international pressure, and we should be giving it top priority. Until we do that, there should be a moratorium on the use of PTA. The damage, the devastation, the deprivation, the discrimination, all of which have been wrought by the PTA, needs to be removed. We cannot be a decent society in which institutions humiliate citizens, citizens humiliate each other, which pieces of drastic, draconian legislation like the PTA still operate. We have to change it, and the time to do it is now, not just because of a possibility of losing GSP Plus, or because we may face another resolution at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, but because it is necessary for a Sri Lanka that is a fully functioning in procedural and substantive terms, democracy.